I remember that moment with frightening clarity, as if it all happened yesterday. The room was filled with the smell of freshly brewed tea and the warm glow of a table lamp, but the comfort that usually accompanied our family dinner had disappeared, leaving behind only a cold tension. My father was sitting in his armchair, his back was straight, his hands were clenched, and the look he gave me was icy, almost aloof. Mom was standing next to me with her arms crossed over her chest, and I didn't need to hear her words to know that the conversation that was about to begin didn't bode well for me. "Rachel," my father said, his voice flat, but there was a note of finality in it, as if he had already made a decision for me, and my opinion didn't matter. "Your mother and I were talking. It's time for you to stop being lazy and help in the family business." Lazy? The word rang in my ears, and it took me a few seconds to realize that he had actually said it. All my years of hard study, the hours I spent doing complicated calculations, my ambitions, dreams, plans, all this was reduced to a simple, insulting word in an instant. Lazy? I asked, trying to stay calm, but I could feel a wave of indignation building up inside. "Yes, that's right," he continued, leaving me no chance to object. "Starting tomorrow, you will work at the store after school." I heard my mother sigh softly, but she didn't say anything, didn't come to my defense, didn't object. She just nodded, agreeing with his words, as if it wasn't an order, but something self-evident. "But I have school, homework," I began, but my father interrupted me with a short, irritated gesture. "Tommy is also studying, but that doesn't stop him from getting involved in the family business." His voice was stern and his gaze was searching, as if he expected resistance from me and was already preparing to suppress it. Tommy? This spoiled brat, who was too lazy to even open a textbook, now suddenly became a role model. I felt resentment boiling up inside me, but I knew it was useless to argue with my father. "You should be grateful for this opportunity," her mother added, speaking for the first time. "In the future, this store will feed you like it fed us all." I lowered my eyes to hide the fury that was surely visible on my face. "Are you grateful? Did they want me to be grateful that they were taking away my chance to build my own future? Grandma always said that knowledge is power, that business is not just the ability to count money, but also the ability to see further, build a strategy, manage, and not obey. I remembered our lessons, how we spent hours discussing profitability, supplies, and ways to win customers, and now I was offered to just become another employee in the store, following someone else's instructions. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, hiding behind that short word, the storm that was bursting out. I didn't argue. I didn't prove to them that I was capable of more than just folding tablecloths and arranging crystal glasses in the windows. If they thought they could run my life the way they run a store, they were very wrong. I'll accept their rules, but only temporarily. I felt my hands clench into fists under the table, my nails digging into my palms, but I kept calm, not letting my emotions get the better of me. I expected resistance. I knew that my parents would not let me go just like that, but their demand to hide the truth from my grandmother struck me in the very heart. Why were they so afraid that she would find out? Because they understood that she would not approve of their decisions, that she would see injustice in it? Or was it because they realized that if Grandma found out, she would take my side? I met my mother's gaze, cold, hard, full of hidden menace, and realized that I had no choice, at least for now. If I wanted to escape from their control, if I wanted to become independent, I had to act carefully. "Okay," I said evenly, trying to keep him steady. "I'll tell Grandma that I'm still working at the store." My father nodded contentedly and went back to his paperwork, as if our conversation was just another business deal that had been successfully completed on his terms. My mother studied me for a while, as if checking whether I was sincere in my answer, but apparently decided that she had won, and turned away, pursing her lips with satisfaction. The next day, after school, for the first time in 2 years, I did not go to the store, but went to a small cafe on the corner, where they were already waiting for me. It smelled of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries, and the air was filled with the cheerful chatter of customers enjoying a rare free evening. This place seemed like a different world to me, a world where no one looked down on me, where no one took my work for granted. The cafe's owner, a good-natured woman named Mrs. Carlyle, greeted me with a warm smile and handed me a branded apron. "Welcome to the team, Rachel," she said, winking at me. "Today will be your first day at work." I smiled back, though excitement was still bubbling inside me. For the first time, I felt that my work would be paid for, that my efforts would make a difference. Working in a cafe was not at all like a store. Here every customer was not just a customer, but a person with whom you could exchange a few words, make his day a little better by offering his favorite drink or a piece of homemade pie. I liked that everyone appreciated each other here, that the staff joked among themselves, helped each other without irritation, without feeling that their work was their duty, and not a conscious choice. The first few days flew by in a blur. I learned how to pour coffee properly, how to quickly wipe the counter without leaving streaks, and how to smile even at tired, annoyed customers who needed not so much coffee as a short moment of relaxation in this cozy corner of the city. Unlike the store, no one here treated me like a free labor force. No one made me feel like I owed anyone anything. But most importantly, for the first time in my life, I received my first salary. I remember how I opened the envelope with trembling hands and saw several bills there. It wasn't much, but it was my money. Earned by my hard work, my efforts, my determination. That evening, when I returned home, I hid the envelope in my desk drawer, took a deep breath and went out into the living room, where my parents were having dinner as if nothing had happened. They didn't ask questions, they didn't ask how my day was, and I didn't say a word either. I just sat across from them, thinking that for the first time in my life I felt truly free. I felt an icy wave run down my spine. Their reaction was not just indifferent, there was something more to it, some hidden background, as if they had been waiting for this moment, having thought in advance about what they would say next. I already knew them too well not to catch this undercurrent, and therefore, when my mother put down her napkin and looked at me with an expression of satisfied superiority, I realized that something was about to happen that I would not like. "Next point?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, even though my stomach was clenching with apprehension. My father put his fork on his plate and leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked at me with the same expression he used to look at store employees when he assigned them a task, as if it were a business conversation rather than a family dinner. "Now that you're graduating from high school and you have a scholarship, you can finally take serious responsibility for the store," he said in a flat, almost matter-of-fact voice. "We need you to work full-time." I froze in disbelief. Did they really say that? After all these years, after everything I had to go through, did they expect me to return to the store, to become a free labor force again, only now full-time? "But I have studies," I objected, carefully watching their reaction. "It's just a community college, Rachel," her mother said dismissively. "This is not Harvard, where you would drown in your studies. You'll have plenty of time. And we're not even asking you to leave him," my father added with forced benevolence. "Just work in the family business while you study." Simply. The word rang in my ears. Just forget about your dreams, just become a shadow in this house again, just give them your time, your freedom, your life. "No," I said before I could stop myself. Both of them abruptly raised their heads, as if they couldn't believe their ears. Tommy, who had been idly picking at dessert with a fork, was now watching us with interest, as if watching an exciting play. "What did you say?" My father's voice became quieter, but there was a steely note in it that always made me uneasy. I took a deep breath, bracing myself. "I said no," I repeated more firmly. "I will not work in the store." The mother clenched her teeth, her fingers dug into the tablecloth, but it was the father who spoke first. "You have to," his voice was no longer steady, it sounded irritated. "We have invested years, money, and resources in you. We've given you everything. And you think you can just say no and walk away? Yes, I replied, surprised at how calm I felt. Because you haven't really given me anything. You used me. I worked in the store for free for 2 years while Tommy did nothing. I earned the money on my own. I found a way out on my own. I went to college on my own. I don't owe you anything. The mother abruptly jumped up from the table, her face pale with rage. How dare you talk to us like that? Thanks to you, Mom, I looked her straight in the eye, and for the first time in all these years, I wasn't afraid. My father sighed heavily and massaged his temples, as if trying to get rid of a headache. Then he nodded slowly, his face turning as cold and hard as granite again. Okay, Rachel, he said in a flat voice that made my skin crawl. If that's what you've decided, then you can start your adult life right now. I frowned, not understanding what he was getting at, but he was already going on. From this day on, you will not receive a penny from us. No financial support. No food, no clothes, no help. If you want to be independent, be independent. The mother grinned, crossing her arms over her chest, her gaze filled with triumph. Let's see how long you can last, sweetheart. But every time I returned to Jenny's room late at night, fatigue washed over me like a heavy wave, and inside there was still a burning feeling of betrayal that did not weaken for a minute. Her family's house was warm, cozy, filled with the smells of home-cooked food and the quiet laughter of her parents, who, unlike mine, seemed truly caring and loving, but no matter how much they tried to surround me with kindness, I knew that this was not my home and not my family, but just a temporary one. A shelter that couldn't last forever. I would wake up before dawn, pack as quietly as possible so as not to disturb any of her relatives, and go to work, where Sarah, my manager, became a real salvation for me during this difficult time. She didn't ask questions or give unnecessary advice, but when I hesitantly asked about additional shifts that first day after moving in, she just nodded, as if she already understood everything, and since then my hours at the cafe have increased without any unnecessary conversations. Work became my anchor, my refuge, a place where I felt needed and independent, but despite this, thoughts about the future haunted me. College was starting in a few months, and even though I had a scholarship, it wasn't enough. I needed a roof over my head, I needed money for food, transportation, textbooks, and the thought that I might not be able to cope was slowly but surely devouring me from the inside. One day, when I finished my shift later than usual and was leaving the cafe, Sarah stopped me at the door, crossing her arms over her chest and looking at me with the same expression that adults look at teenagers they understand too well but don't want to put pressure on them. Have you found a place to live after you leave your friend? What is it? She asked simply, and there was no pity or condemnation in the question, only sincere curiosity. I hesitated for a moment, but then I shook my head. Not yet, but I'm working on it, I replied, trying to feign the confidence I didn't have. She nodded, tapping her fingers thoughtfully on the counter. I have a friend who rents a small apartment. Nothing special, but a decent place, and the price is lower than in other places. If you want, I can talk to her. I stared at her, not knowing what to say. Part of me wanted to proudly refuse, to prove that I could handle it on my own, but the reality was that I really needed help, and if fate gave me a chance, I couldn't afford to miss it. Yes, that would be great, I finally exhaled, feeling something inside me tremble with relief. Sarah smiled, patted me on the shoulder and, waving her hand, went to her office, and as I went outside, I suddenly realized that for the first time in recent weeks I felt hope. I raced through familiar streets, barely noticing the houses rushing past, the blurred lights of shop windows, and the rare passers-by who had no idea that my life was crumbling at this moment. Anger pulsed through me like hot metal, my thoughts were confused, going back over and over again to what I had just read. They didn't just want to get rid of me, they wanted to erase me, ruin my future, make sure that no one would ever see me as a decent person. As soon as I arrived at my grandmother's house, I didn't even knock. I just opened the door and rushed inside, stunned by a mixture of resentment, rage and despair. Grandma was sitting in the living room, holding the phone in her hands, and when she looked up at me, there was no shadow of doubt or condemnation in her eyes, just quiet sadness and something else that I couldn't immediately make out. "Did you see that?" I exhaled, breathing heavily, feeling tears coming to my eyes, but not letting them fall. Grandma nodded slowly, put the phone down on the coffee table and looked at me carefully, as if assessing my condition. "Yes, honey, I saw it." Her voice was low, calm, but there was steel in it, hidden under the soft intonation. They. I stammered, not knowing how to put into words the horror I was feeling. They accused me of stealing. They threw me out of the house, and now they're making a criminal out of me. Grandma slowly got up, came up to me and took my hands tightly. "I know," she said simply. "Do you know?" I looked at her in confusion. "Grandma, why didn't you write to me? Didn't you call me as soon as you saw this?" She sighed, ran a hand through her silver hair, and shook her head. "Because I wanted to see what you'd do. I knew you'd come to me. I knew you wouldn't give up. And most importantly, I knew it wasn't your fault." She squeezed my fingers gently. "But I needed to hear it from you." I exhaled sharply, feeling something fragile tremble inside me that I had been trying to hold on to for so long. "Grandma, I didn't take anything, I swear." My voice cracked, and I hated myself for it, hated that I even had to justify myself to someone who really loved me. "I know, Rachel," she repeated, her voice as hard as a rock. "And now we need to decide what to do about it." She led me to the sofa, motioning for me to sit down, and she began to pace around the room, lost in thought. "They did a mean thing, but don't forget why they did it," she said, stopping in front of me. "They're afraid." "Afraid?" I snorted in disbelief. "They're not afraid, Grandma, they're enjoying it." "No, honey," she shook her head. "They're afraid you'll succeed without them. That you will prove that you don't need their generosity. They are afraid that you will become better than they ever imagined." I was silent, digesting her words, feeling a new fire ignite in my chest. "What should I do?" I asked, barely able to keep the tremor out of my voice. Grandma approached, put her hand on my shoulder and squeezed it. "First of all, you will stay here. It's not even up for discussion. Secondly, we will collect evidence that you did not take any money. I'm sure there are records and accounting documents in the store. They're not smart enough to think through every detail. And thirdly," she smiled at me, and there was something like mischief in her eyes, "you won't just prove your innocence, you'll make them regret the day they decided to betray you." As soon as I saw Sarah's comment confirming my words, it was as if a dam had burst inside me, holding back all the pain, anger, and sense of injustice that had been building up in me since the day my parents kicked me out the door. I knew they would try to defend their lies, but now it wasn't just my truth against their lies. I had evidence, witnesses, people who knew who I really was, and not the pathetic thief they were trying to make me out to be. My post was spreading across social media, with new comments appearing every minute, and to my relief, many of those who had been quick to condemn me were now beginning to doubt me. Wait, so if Rachel worked in a cafe, then why did her parents say that she was still in the store? Sarah is a respected person, she would not lie. Why didn't her parents go to the police right away, if this is true? Wait, so did she really have to pay rent to live at home? What kind of normal parent would do that? I watched my parents' lies crumble under the weight of common sense and real facts, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that the truth really had power. But I knew it was just the beginning. Grandma ended the phone conversation and turned to me, her eyes sparkling with determination, and there was a note of anger in her voice that I had never noticed before. "James is already at the store," she said, glancing at the papers that were still on the table. "He is reviewing the accounting reports, but he has already found serious discrepancies. Your parents used your name to get money out of the business, Rachel. They literally stole from their own daughter to cover their tracks. I swallowed, feeling a new wave of rage rise inside me. How much? My voice was flat, almost emotionless, but inside I could barely contain the raging storm. It's not known for sure yet, but we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars. Grandma pursed her lips, and for the first time I saw in her not just a kind, loving woman, but a real predator, ready to tear those who dared to harm those she loves. They have to answer for this, I whispered, feeling a cold, calculating calmness cover me, pushing aside the remnants of shock. And they will answer, Grandma nodded. Her face remained impassive, but I could see the lights of icy anger dancing in the depths of her eyes. But first, let's make sure that no one has any more doubts about who they really are. I looked at the papers, then at the phone screen, when my post was still typing comments, and realized that the moment had come to strike back. I made a new post, attaching photos of accounting statements with my name and amounts that I had never seen, and then added, "Here is evidence that my parents used my name to withdraw money from the family business, and then accused me of theft to hide their machinations. If anyone is still in doubt, here is the number of the accountant who can confirm this information." And another question, if I really stole the money, why didn't my parents go to the police? Why did they wait 3 weeks until Grandma returned from vacation? Think about it. As soon as I clicked post, Grandma was already picking up her phone to call her lawyer. I stood in the corner of the store, watching as my mother, still dressed in her elegant blouse and expensive shoes, tried in vain to maintain her dignity while the security guard hired by my grandmother led her to the exit. Her face was chalk white, her lips were pressed into a thin line, and her hands were shaking so much that she could barely hold her purse. My father, who was usually so arrogant and self-confident, now looked 10 years older, his shoulders hunched and his jaw was clenched tightly, as if he was trying his best not to explode with anger. Tommy muttered softly, who was standing next to her, looking at her in confusion. He didn't understand what was going on, couldn't realize that his world was falling apart, that his ideal parents weren't that perfect. My mother stopped in the doorway, giving my grandmother a look full of despair and pleading. "You can't do this to us, Mom." Her voice was shaking, but she was still trying to hold on. "This is our legacy, our life." Grandma didn't even blink. "No, it's my legacy that you tried to steal." Her voice was as cold as ice. "Now get out of my store." The mother opened her mouth, but couldn't find the words. The father, seeing that resistance was pointless, just exhaled angrily and, turning around, went outside. His mother ran after him, and Tommy hesitated, not knowing what to do, until his grandmother turned to him and said in an unexpectedly soft voice, "You don't have to go with them, Tommy." He flinched, his gaze darting between my grandmother and me, but then he abruptly stepped back, shook his head and rushed after his parents. I watched him go, and for the first time in all these years, I didn't feel angry at him, but rather sad. He lived under their wing all his life, was their favorite, never knew what fighting was, and maybe he felt as loyal now as I did the day they kicked me out. When the door closed behind them, Grandma exhaled and turned to the assembled store staff, saying loudly and clearly, "Now that this page has been turned over, I have a new announcement. I'm officially appointing Rachel as the new store manager." My heart skipped a beat. I whispered, not believing my ears. She turned to me, her gaze full of pride. "You deserve it, Rachel. You were always the only one who really understood what it meant to run a business, who really loved this store. It was always meant to be yours." I looked around the store, this family business that was once a symbol of injustice, hard work without reward, pain and deception, but now it was something else. This was my chance. My choice. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and nodded confidently. "I won't let you down, Grandma." She smiled. "I don't doubt it." I was sitting in the courtyard of the campus, feeling the warmth of a paper cup of coffee in my hands, which my grandmother, as always, brought from the corner cafe. Students were making noise around me. Someone was in a hurry to attend lectures. Someone was sitting on the grass with laptops. Someone was animatedly discussing upcoming exams. But I barely heard their voices, completely concentrating on talking to the person who was the only real family for me. "Do you ever regret what happened?" Grandma asked, cautiously watching me over the top of her cappuccino. Her gaze was soft, but there was something more in it, a desire to hear the truth, to understand what was in my heart. I thought about it, peering into the foam of my coffee, as if hoping to find the answer in these caramel patterns, but the answer was inside me. I just didn't realize it right away. "No," I finally said, looking up at her. "Of course, it hurt, especially at the beginning. I felt abandoned, unwanted, betrayed. But if that hadn't happened, I would still be living in their shadow, working in a store that I was forced into against my will, still hoping that one day they would see me as something more than just a burden." Grandma nodded, as if these words were confirmation of what she already knew. "Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the most difficult trials," she said, peering intently into my face. I smiled. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" I asked. She shrugged, but a small smile flickered at the corners of her lips. "I knew you could handle it. I knew that you were strong, that there was a fire in you that they would never be able to put out. They tried to break you, and you became stronger." I took a sip of coffee, feeling the warmth of the drink spreading inside, but it no longer warms me as much as these words. "And now what?" I asked. Grandma leaned back on the bench, staring into the distance, but I knew that her thoughts were completely occupied with me. "Now you will graduate from college and take your place in the store. It was always supposed to be yours, but now it's not just a legacy, but your conscious choice. You can do whatever you want with him." I nodded, because I knew she was right. This store, which was once a symbol of injustice and slavery for me, has now become a symbol of victory, freedom, and my own path. My parents thought that by forcing me to work there from the age of 14, they were punishing me. But in fact, they gave me knowledge, experience, and the ability to see beyond storefronts and cash registers. They thought that by kicking me out of the house, they would break me. Instead, they gave me wings. "This store," I said, and there was unshakable confidence in my voice, "just wait and see what I'll do with it." 2 years have passed. 2 years have passed since I crossed the threshold of that very store, no longer as a silent employee, but as its future owner. It's been 2 years since my name was cleared of dirty accusations, and my parents, who ruined my life, eventually destroyed their own. 2 years in which I had changed so much that at times it seemed to me that that scared girl stuffing things into a bag at the prom was a completely different person. Now, as I stood in the main hall of the store, surrounded by racks of elegant dishes, the finest tablecloths and crystal glasses, for the first time in a long time I felt that everything was going as it should have been from the very beginning. Grandma was sitting at the cash register, holding a cup of coffee from Corner Cafe, which, as it turned out, had long been her favorite. She watched me with a smile as I examined step by step what was now rightfully mine. "Ready?" "What is it?" she asked when I stopped in front of a showcase with new products that I personally selected from suppliers. I took a deep breath, allowing myself to savor this moment. "I'm ready," I replied firmly. The official documents have already been signed. The store was now completely mine, and no one could challenge that anymore. I've rethought everything. We updated the logo, changed the design of the shop windows, relied on exclusive collections, an individual approach to customers, and a new level of service that not only sold things, but created emotions. And it worked. "You made him better," Grandma looked at me with pride. I smiled because I knew, yes, I did. When the store doors opened and my first customer of the day entered the room, I realized that I was no longer afraid of tomorrow. I had a business, I had a family that really meant something to me, I had a life that I chose on my own. My parents tried to deprive me of my future, but in the end they lost everything themselves. Their expensive possessions were sold off, loans hung on them like a noose around their necks, and the people who had once supported their lies turned away after learning the truth. Tommy, having lost his financial future, was forced to go to work and face the reality that everything he had had to earn. Despite everything, we got closer, learned to understand each other and build a real brotherly relationship, without the pressure and manipulation of our parents. As for them, the last few times they tried to get in touch, I didn't even open their messages. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. And I wasn't going to try. I wasn't living in the past anymore. I was living in the future. And I had big things ahead of me.